Welcome to Keto Life Support, where we make your keto life sustainable, fun, and low stress. I'm Kim Howerton, and I'll be coming to you weekly with some of my keto besties to bring you the practical, real-world keto advice that you need. Quick disclaimer, I am not a doctor, and even if we do have a doctor in the house from time to time, he or she is not your doctor, and nothing we say on this show should be taken as medical advice. Always check in with a trusted medical professional about your own personal medical concerns. Hello and welcome to Keto Life Support. This is Kim Howerton. Glad to be joining you. I'm recording a little quick intro for this show number 47. Yesterday I had a really good talk with my friend Carolina Cartier. She's going to be my guest today, and we're getting into all sorts of things. It's just a chit chat, but it's also her story where we go deep into it. And this will be especially interesting for anyone who struggles with PCOS or fertility. She has a fascinating tale. She got into keto before keto was really a thing. And so she had to find her own way. And it's just a really interesting story. She's an amazing friend, an amazing person, and an amazing story of hope, especially for people who think maybe they won't have kiddos and they would like some. So enjoy and get to know Carolina. All right. Well, welcome to Keto Life Support. This is Kim, and I am here with my good friend, Carolina Cartier. Hey, Carolina.
Hello. Hi.
So,
it's glad to reconnect.
It is really nice to reconnect. So I met you years ago, just early on in keto. I think it was just online, right?
It was. Yeah, it was in one of the popular Facebook groups at the time when there weren't a lot of them out there. I want to say it was maybe 2017. It's been
probably
a while now.
Yeah. And then we hit it off, and then I am bossy. And so I made Carolina go to a conference with me, and we've been great friends since then. So Carolina has a fabulous story. She is someone who has a really interesting background in terms of her struggle with some of her health issues, and I'm going to let her fill you in on that. So yeah, give us the background, Carolina. Like, it started early for you, right? These issues.
Really early. And if anyone wants a written kind of transcript of that, my story has been discussed on Diet Doctor when it comes to fertility. So if you go and you look for that, you'll see some of the information.
We'll put the
there.
links in.
Yeah. So very early on, I was around 3 years old. I was diagnosed with precocious puberty.
At three,
which is pretty early even to have that diagnosis. And I was growing quite rapidly. And basically what this means is I had really early endocrine problems, hormone issues. I was growing quite rapidly. I was starting to develop tissues that you wouldn't expect to develop until puberty. So that was happening really early. So because of that, I was monitored pretty closely by physicians. I kept growing. I am 6 feet tall. We don't know if that's a direct result of precocious puberty or if I was just always going to be tall. But at age 13, I had stopped growing. Thank goodness. But I was not having a menstrual cycle. It hadn't started. So I wasn't having, menarche where, you start having your period. And so we started doing some more testing on my hormones and checking. And at the age of 13, I was diagnosed with PCOS, which, if anyone is familiar, it's polycystic ovarian syndrome. At the time, so this would have been, I'm aging myself, late 90s. And so at the time, there really weren't a lot of treatments. And the thought was, you just won't be able to have children. You don't ovulate. And we've since developed a lot of treatments, and a lot of women with PCOS are able to go on and have children. Not as dire of a diagnosis, but still to be so young and to have a second diagnosis that is endocrine related, with kind of an unknown future and really no solution. And the unfortunate part is that the official treatment in allopathic medicine is still the same. So this many years later, the treatment is the same. They give you metformin. If you're familiar, it's an insulin sensitizing drug, to help with glucose uptake. And then they put you on birth control pills.
Right. And they also often give you spiralactone or
something
Oh,
similar.
yeah, they can be, yeah.
Right? They
Yeah.
can, because they're like, you're going to be bloated with this. So 'cause I was diagnosed with PCOS about this. I was older, but I'm older than you. So it was about the same time in the 90s that, I got a few years ahead of you, but in the mid 90s, I was diagnosed with PCOS too. So yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, here's a pill for the pill, and it's a treatment for the treatment that you go through. And so unfortunately, that is the standard of care currently, unless you go to a functional medicine practitioner or another well-informed practitioner who's aware of perhaps some dietary intervention. I was not given any dietary intervention. Going through my early teenage years, I was pretty bad about taking the birth control pills and the metformin. The metformin made me really sick. If you've taken it before, GI symptoms are really common, right? So you might have a lot of diarrhea or bloating or, feeling nauseated. So it's not fun. It is quite effective. We do have research that it's quite effective at helping with glucose uptake. Although I've been listening to Dr. Ben Bickman lately talk about why that is. And it's actually because it's a mild mitochondrial poison or toxin. So he goes into that whole process. It upregulates AMPK, and I've heard him say that several times recently. And I've never heard it described that way, other than we just know it is effective, but there are, as we know, side effects. So
yeah, what's interesting about metformin that I find is when you really dive into it, how it works on some level is just still a little theoretical. They have theories about how it's working, but it's not all, it's a little murky. They're still working it out. Yeah.
And we know that, essentially what it's doing is changing the way that we're uptaking or how we're regulating our glucose control, right? Which you and I know can also be done through dietary intervention, right? What's coming in can also be changed. We don't just have to change what we do with it once we've ingested it. We can change what we're ingesting. And so I had not been given any advice on that. I don't know if you were given any advice on that or instruction. I probably was told to eat less, move more. I mean, that's probably about it. But yeah, so I had a PCOS diagnosis for the next 16 years, right?
So from the time you were 13 until
to 29.
29.
So in this time, well, what happened? So I started gaining a lot of weight.
Were you heavy when you got the diagnosis when you were 13?
I thought I was.
Right.
I definitely thought I was. But I've since looked back at pictures and realized, I was probably okay. And again, I was already 6 feet tall. Right. And actually the weight that when I look at my old chart, I weighed less than my lowest adult weight. And recently, I've been down to my lowest adult weight for those who don't know, I am pregnant. So I'm not at
You're
that
not
right
there
now.
Yeah.
But, spoiler, but, I was in the range, even for BMI. Looking back at it, I was a normal BMI.
Just a big person.
Right. If we're using it. Yes. I was just tall, an adult at 13.
Right.
So I really wasn't, but shortly thereafter, I did start gaining weight. And I think that part of the reason I hadn't gained weight or my BMI wasn't going up or I wasn't gaining as much body fat at the time was just that I was growing so quickly. Right. So I think it was probably just being used up. But my diet was very standard American diet, right? Lots of carbs, lots of carb-coated proteins, which I now know now, right? Like everything was a wrap or a pizza. It was probably low in protein overall. All these things that it was just very fast food kind of style food. So that's what I had been eating. Definitely high carb. Didn't know any better. It was considered normal.
Right. That's what we ate in the 90s.
Yeah, it's just what everyone was eating, which, honestly hasn't changed that much on average when we look at the American diet. So I started gaining a lot of weight I was sometime in my 20s. I got up to my highest weight of just around 400 pounds. And I remember, I was either 380 or 390. And I actually told myself, I remember saying this to myself, it's not so bad. I haven't crossed 400. Right. And I don't know if anyone does that when you're looking, if you are tracking your weight, you're like, well, it's not so because, and you come up with whatever the next number is. I haven't crossed this, or I haven't crossed that, or I haven't,
I can still sit in a chair. I haven't broken a chair yet.
And we kind of start making these excuses or justifications or ideas. So I remember that. very clearly. And that weigh-in at the doctor was the last time I went to a regular physician. The advice that they gave me was, again, eat less, move more. And if you've ever been told that, what does that mean? Just eat less and be starving all the time. And I really was trying, right? I think a lot of us have been those lifelong dieters. You try to white knuckle it and eat less, but you're hungry. And that's what I remember. Every time I tried to eat less, I felt hungry all the time. I would eat every couple of hours. I had to. I was always thinking about food. I was always hungry. I'd be eating a meal thinking about the snack I'm going to have before my next meal, right? So it was a very food obsessed time, and wasn't great. I hadn't had a cycle. I had stopped taking all medications.
And so that whole time from 13 to your late 20s, you'd never had a cycle?
I had not. None.
Yeah. Okay. None.
Yeah. Which is pretty, I say severe. It's considered like classic PCOS. So there's, 3 different criteria for PCOS, although we don't always meet those. There's kind of debates over what the criteria should be. I certainly have my thoughts on it. So I was probably in my early 20s. Yeah. I was in my early 20s when I had weighed in at my heaviest for what I know for sure. And I'm pretty sure I probably crossed 400, but I have no proof, right? I did try to improve my diet and eat a little bit better, tried to cook at home. I think I did some, I didn't know how to cook at all. So I started there, right? So I started with, okay, here's how do you cook some chicken and some really bland broccoli, right? Which, now I know about seasonings and, butter and things like that. So I've since learned how to cook a little bit better. But I had lost some weight over time. And at one point I started listening, if anyone knows Sean Croxton, I started listening to him and some of his podcasts, and he was kind of early in the podcast. He would do these health summits, and I listened to him and I learned about Weston A. Price, which the Weston A. Price Foundation has kind of their dietary pattern that's similar to paleo in the sense of food quality. So pasture raised meats. And then they also have you sprout any grains if you're going to have them, things like that. Any sugar that you're having would be honey or maple syrup, nothing refined. So I started following that and feeling really good about the quality, but I really wasn't losing weight.
So some people would call that kind of an ancestral approach,
yes,
right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I felt great about it. And now looking back, I mean, if we're really looking at an ancestral approach, it wouldn't have had a lot of honey and a lot of grains. And, now I realize that the macronutrient composition does play a role if we're looking at an ancestral diet. So if you're already healthy and you're saying, oh, I want to have just high quality and follow an ancestral pattern of eating, then absolutely macronutrients still play a role of what likely would have been available, what's the most nutrient dense, what they would have gone after, right? All of that plays a role.
How often are you coming across bees?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. Are there mangoes in the Seattle
Iowa?
area?
I don't know.
Yeah. Like in the middle of winter, like, is that really happening? So I see that now, but at the time I was just focusing on quality. I had no macronutrient composition or awareness at all. So from that, I eventually went to a naturopathic doctor for the first time. And I went in and I said, I am exhausted. I don't know what to do. I'm trying. I can't lose weight. I know I won't lose weight, although now I'm married and I would like to have children. And I think that might be possible. Can we reverse PCOS, or is there a treatment without losing weight? Because I can't lose weight. I'm just in a bigger body. I have tried everything.
So you just said the weight loss is off the table,
yeah.
Not because I don't want to, but I've accepted this is not going to change.
Right. And I was, convinced. And now, there's a lot of debate, and there are good things and maybe some negative things about some of the healthy at every size or healthy at any size, or some people call it fat acceptance movement. There's a lot of different names for that movement. And there are definitely some positives. There were definitely some stigmas and some mistreatments by the medical community of patients. But what I was buying in at the time was that I can't lose weight, but I can still be healthy at 300 something, close to 400-ish pounds. I was convinced that that was going to be okay. So for the first time, this physician ran my fasting insulin. And I didn't even know what that was. So she just ran a full panel of all the stuff that she runs. And if you've ever been to like a functional medicine or a naturopathic doctor, it's a whole different experience than the 10, 15 minutes you have with a regular MD. Okay. So I couldn't believe that she spoke to me for an hour and then that we pulled so many different things for blood, right? Not just lipids, not just weight and blood pressure. So we went through all of that. Now, if you are familiar with insulin, and you've heard all the many people, especially in the low carb world, talking about it, we know that ideal would be 5 or below.
Right. For your fasting insulin.
For your fasting insulin. Meaning that's what's circulating all the time, not after you've had a meal. Okay. Mine came back at 70.
70.
70, which is quite high.
Quite high.
Most lab tests, which are the labs basically use an average of the population, right? They'll say that 20 or below, around there, I think one of them is like 19.6 is normal. That's what they'll say. Mm-hmm. I was way out of range, even for the average of the population.
So when they say normal, just, people should know. I think they know, but if people don't know, like what they think of as normal is based on an unhealthy population. Mm-hmm. So they're saying the cutoff for healthy in an unhealthy person, if that makes any sense, is 20, but you were 70.
Yes.
That's one of the highest fasting insulins I've heard of. I've heard of a few higher, but you're at the top of the list. And while this was going on, what was your A1C, right? Because most people will look at A1C.
So normally we hear people talking about their glucose levels. Mm-hmm. And this is the standard diagnosis for anyone listening for type 2 diabetes. It's based upon glucose alone. Right? So they'll use either your fasting glucose number in the morning and then combine that with your A1C. And your A1C is basically an average based upon your blood cells, how much glucose they took up. My A1C, I'm staring at it right now because I pulled up that old presentation we did, 5.0.
Which people, you'd be like the pinnacle of blood glucose health.
Perfectly normal. Yeah. And so what people need to realize and we didn't actually say this. So now I work in clinic as a nutritionist. I am a certified nutritionist. So I work in clinic and I see patients, and how I describe this relationship and why it's so important that we review insulin is that glucose is the average, right? This is the danger. If it goes too high, there is a danger. We can have damage, vascular damage. That's why we monitor it. That's why you kind of fall over the line into diabetes, even though we kind of have this range beforehand where we might be concerned. But insulin tells us how hard your body is working to keep it there, right? So in my case, I had like this amazing pancreas that's pumping out
your pancreas
all
is
this
working
insulin.
So hard for you.
Like they really did. And I love like your analogies that I've heard, right? We keep turning up the volume, right? The pancreas kept turning it up saying, hello, listen to me, bring the blood sugar down. And so it was doing its job, but it was having to work really hard in order to keep my blood sugar normal. Mm-hmm. And we want normal blood sugar. But what happens? And what I had here, I mean, now I look at these blood tests and I see, I had insulin resistance, obviously.
Serious.
Right? Yeah. Like it was pretty bad. We're having to turn up the volume really high in order to get my cells to listen and to take up enough glucose. So knowing that I had insulin this high and that my blood sugar was still somewhat okay, it's telling me that my pancreas hasn't quite failed, so to speak, right? Like the signaling's still there. I'm still able to listen, but I'm highly insulin resistant and we need to intervene now.
Right. Like you were like, if you were the dam, like the dam is about to burst and you
do something now.
Right. Like I could envision if I saw this blood work, I could think if I saw this person in 12 months, maybe even 6 months. It's hard to know when the bomb's going off here, but I would envision at some time in the near future, they would be frankly diabetic and they might have an A1C of 8.
Yeah.
In a very short period of time.
I was very close to that. And I am of the mentality that you can reverse type 2 diabetes. We're not allowed to use the C word in the medical community. But I'm of that. I think we've seen, you and I at least have seen enough people go from an 8 A1C down to a 5 with normal insulin, having everything improve, right? We've seen that happen. We've seen notes from physicians saying, I don't know how you did it, right? So it seems to be that it can be reversed. Perhaps you always have that predisposition, maybe not. But to me, if we can't diagnose it based upon current lab tests, I personally say it's not there. That's my thought, but to each their own. So the naturopathic doctor that I was seeing said, hey, your insulin's really high. I think we should intervene with your diet. And I'm going, well, what do you mean? I eat this really clean diet. I get all of my meat from local farms. I do eat a lot of sprouted rices and grains and beans and honey. I had a lot of these really great high quality ingredient brownies, I was eating a lot, what's wrong? They're all great.
Organic.
Yeah, exactly. But at that time, now, and this physician actually was using HCG therapeutically. So this is not just for weight loss. HCG diets, if you've heard of them, and they started being used for weight loss, and they kind of started preying upon people online and selling these weird things. But there are some therapeutic reasons for HCG to be used as an intervention. And that was something that she was doing. And she said, maybe you would benefit from this. And I'm thinking, well, why? And so we kind of spoke about that. And that's where I learned about ketones for the first time. And she said, well, hey, you're going to use these urine strips, which we know now. I mean, short term, early on, they can give you some good information. But I had never heard of a ketone. I didn't know what it was. And I went down the rabbit hole. And this is where I learned, apparently, that I was meant to be a researcher. And hopefully that will still happen, right? After the program that I've done. And so I went down the rabbit hole and started learning about ketones and a ketogenic diet. And how do you do this without being on HCG? And there were very few groups at the time. This would have been 2014. So this was 2014. There was
hardly anything about keto.
Not a lot. I think Jimmy Moore's book had just come out or was about to come out.
Maybe Finney and Volek's book was out.
Yeah. So it was just not a lot of resources, not a lot. But I did my best to understand. I thought, this is for me. And I remember, earlier I just said I was always thinking about food, right? I was always hungry. And it wasn't just that I'm a foodie and I like good food, which I do, but I was hungry and I felt starving.
Legitimately hungry all the time.
Right? Hunger pangs. I would get, what I now know now it was like low blood sugar, probably reactive hypoglycemia because of my insulin resistance. Right. I would get really hangry, sweaty, shaky, couldn't think, brain fog, right? And I wasn't checking my blood sugar, but now I know that's very likely what was going on. And so from what little I could find about a ketogenic diet, what I really liked was the idea of not being hungry all the time, getting that time back, getting that mental space back, being able to go 4 hours, which seems silly now, now we talk about
but
fasting.
It's such a crazy, I remember before keto, if I had to drive for 2 hours, there would need to be snacks in the car.
Exactly.
I could not make it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, now I have children and it's kind of the same thing where and to each their own, this is not a parenting judgment, right? But I hear from some friends are like, yeah, they're always eating. My kids are always eating. And I'm thinking, well, now that I've been keto a long time, we just stick to meals, right? So my kids aren't snacking in between meals. I don't have to have food for me or for them all the time, right? We can go play for a couple hours or go to the park or go on a walk or a hike or whatever it may be. And we're going to be able to make it from breakfast to lunch, which seems obvious, right? It seems like that should be fine. It's probably what all of our grandparents did without an issue. But in my life, I wasn't used to that. I always had something, either eating or drinking something caloric all the time.
Right.
So, for me, that was really intriguing. And so I started. And I'm just going to throw this quote out there. I've used it on a couple other podcasts. And if you've made it this far and you've listened to my story, here's what I have to say as my number one piece of advice, or from a quote, is a year from now, you'll wish you had started today. And I say that because even in my own life, sometimes we have a hard time pulling the trigger, whether it's a new project or a different dietary regimen or just getting started on anything. We've put all this time and thought into it, and then we don't actually do it. And I still have that issue sometimes. There's this little bit of procrastination. I was just talking about this earlier with you, right? But what happened in this case, I thought, well, what do I have to lose, right? I'm just going to try it, see if I feel less hungry. I'm not expecting to lose weight. I'm just trying to see if I can reverse PCOS. So I started, and there wasn't a lot of support. There weren't a lot of resources. I kind of fumbled through, but I got the gist of it, right? Reduce carbohydrate really low. Eat from this list of vegetables. There you go. And if you're ever trying to simplify it, it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to do a lot of baking. I don't. And I think it's better not to do too much, especially if you're like, I need something quick and easy, then just, keep it quick and easy. Have your protein, have your veggie if you're eating them. There's all these different spectrums of low carb now, or keto. And that's what I did. And I kind of fumbled through, and it was amazing. And I mean, pretty much immediately, I stopped feeling hungry all the time. And here's the biggest part, especially if you have PCOS, if anyone listening, right? I went from having no cycle for 16 years, ever.
Like not even, because some people with PCOS, they're like a couple times a year I have a cycle or what.
Maybe they have long ones. I might have had some spotting here or there, but really I was not having a cycle of any kind. I was completely anovulatory, as we would say. So nothing for 16 years. And I had started in August 2014. December 2014, I had my first cycle. So 4 months. Yeah.
Wow.
4 months. Now, I had cleaned up the quality, so maybe that played a role. But you guys, I mean, I went from nothing for my whole life, basically, right, to having a cycle in 4 months. And I had one in January and February and March. And
you were rolling from there.
From there, it just happened. They started, I think they were like 36 days. And then within 2015, I was down to 28-day, normal, regular, predictable cycles, right? Wow. Everything looked good. And we had done this blood work preliminarily, which I highly recommend.
You're so lucky. Right. So many people don't have that.
I highly recommend if you're going to start on something, get blood work early. And I say this, in the clinic where I work, like I would really like it if we can get this blood work before we make changes so that we can see what's happening and also see what we're targeting, right? Everyone's situation is a little different. So I had this blood work and it had all my sex hormones, and we saw this drop in my insulin. We saw that my hormones were normalizing, right? My progesterone, that's a big thing for people with PCOS. It kind of kept getting better and better every time we checked. Every couple of months that we would check the second half of my cycle. You often do like a day 21 check at its peak. It kept getting stronger and stronger. Like I'm just healing. So not only was this happening, but it's kind of a bit of a confounder. I was dropping weight like crazy, and I wasn't trying.
Because you thought you couldn't lose weight.
I thought I couldn't. I'm in a larger body. That's just how it is. I was eating, and this is maybe controversial, I was eating very high fat keto. Now that was the way to do it then. There really was only one way then.
Right. Back then it was like 85% keto or you're not keto. I mean, 85% fat keto. Yeah.
So I was eating pretty high fat. I was definitely doing fatty coffees. I was eating fat bombs. I was eating things that now, if someone stalls, we would start to look at that and say, hey, maybe you don't need these anymore. But honestly, I'm very thankful that that's how I started. I think it was a gentle transition and it helped a lot with, I think, satiety, right? When I said I was hungry, I had no issues transitioning to a low carb diet. I felt satisfied. All I had were positive things.
Yeah, this is a good opportunity. I'm just going to jump in and say something, which is one of the things that is hard to deal with in this community and in any community. When you're talking about nutrition, people want like the magic bullet answer. And so it tends to be that people say, this is the one thing that's going to fix what's wrong. And the reality is much more nuanced than that. And so one of the things that's happened recently, and you might have noticed this, Carolina, is high protein keto has gotten very popular. High protein, lower fat keto has gotten very, very popular recently, or not even maybe calling it keto, but low carb, high protein, lower fat. And actually I agree with it. I think it's great. I think it works for a lot of people that need it. But I think one of the biggest mistakes we do is putting that on people who are new to keto, because I think there is a period of healing that needs to be fostered in a lot of us by going a little higher on the fat for a while. And there can be some real deep healing for a lot of us in terms of our hunger signaling, our hormones, our insulin, so many things. And now I'm not saying that there's a prescriptive amount of fat anyone needs to eat, but I am saying like, there's a lot of people out there pushing sort of this higher protein, lower fat. And like, you could count me in their number. But I think one of the things that's so important to tell people is that's not the way any of us started this.
Right. For anyone who's kind of that keto veteran,
yeah,
you probably started higher fat. And I think that's perfectly fine. I'm not concerned about saturated fat. I'm not concerned with natural fats that come from animal products or fruit fats, as we call them, right? Avocado oil, coconut oil, olive oil. I'm not concerned about those as an intake. And like, exactly, hormones. I was on this process, this journey. The whole reason I started, I was convinced I couldn't lose weight. It was just for hormones. And I think I needed that permission to eat whole food that included fat as it comes and not worry about it. And my fat bombs were things like coconut oil, right?
Right.
That probably were mixed with peanut butter or something like that. I try to remember now, so many years ago.
But I mean, when I started keto, if somebody had told me to only eat lean meats and, cottage cheese and not have ribeye and don't put butter on things, I wouldn't have been able to stick to that because my hormones were not in such stable place. I wasn't fat adapted. Like, context is important because one of the things I say is like, there's nutrients, which is like what's on the outside that we intake into our body. And then there's metabolism, which is what we do with the nutrients. And it's not like a one-way street. They influence each other. So over time, you'll be in a different state than you are at the beginning of keto. And so how you eat might shift, or it might not, but it might shift. And so it's a feedback loop, and you need to be in better health. You can't jump to the end and actually expect that to fix things.
Right. I mean, it's the same if you talk about fasting, right? I mean, now there's some people who have never fasted, right? If I'm eating every 2 hours and you say, okay, you're just going to go into a 48-hour fast, forget it. Right? It's like,
forget it.
This is something you have to practice. This is, we talk about the fasting muscle, but it was the same thing with just changing your diet, right? Learning how to cook was a big part of that, right? You can't just jump into something. And at the time, and I'm not a fan of a lot of what we now see as keto packaged foods. And there's a benefit to that they exist in the way that they make it accessible for a lot of people. But a lot of them are not great quality. Remember, I cared a lot about high quality of what I'm eating. And then a lot of them are really just lower versions of carbohydrate with random fibers in there and just,
They're like low carb junk food.
Yes.
Not all of them, but a lot of them.
Right. I know we both have our favorites, right? There's some things I use and there's some things and everyone kind of has their line. And you'll see this too on the spectrum of low carb and keto. It's like, there's lazy keto, dirty keto, strict, high protein keto, high fat. I mean, there's all these different names and everyone has their line for what works for them and what's important to them. And I think that's fine, right? We all have our line. There's some products that I like that I find are useful in my cooking, but I had to learn how to cook. And I'm very thankful that, honestly, that there weren't prepackaged, frozen, delivered meals at the time because I learned an incredible life skill, which is just how to cook at all. Because I was starting with nothing. I was, someone who was eating so much fast food and takeout as a young person, and I just never learned the skill of cooking. So I was really fortunate to be able to learn that way.
Oh, and I'm going to interrupt again because I like to interrupt you, which is one thing that I used to be like HCG, like, yuck, because so many people, by the time I heard about it, were putting people on like 400 and 500 calorie a day diets plus the HCG. And I'm like, oh, HCG diets, they screw people up. They like ruin people's, all this stuff. I've recently actually found out that there does seem to be some evidence, not the 500 calorie part. That's different. But just the HCG in itself, I finally found some evidence that like what it actually does. And it looks like it might have some effect on leptin resistance, perhaps. So there might be a reason for some practitioners to use it. It's the diet people were putting people on with it that was the problem.
And then they started selling like drops online where you don't even know what's in there versus, an actual HCG injection from a physician, right? So there are some therapeutic uses, and I'm glad because it's how I learned what a ketone was by this method.
Now, you probably could have been put on a ketogenic diet without this supplement, and you would have been just as well off. But it was your path.
Right. It was how I learned about it for the first time. And it worked out for me to learn that way because now it's somewhat effortless. So very, very long story short, started 2014. What are we in? 2021. In 2017, I did become pregnant. We were trying.
So you got your cycle, you were married at the time, you got your cycle. And then so how long after you started getting your cycle again and you went keto, were you pregnant with the boys?
The boys. So I started my cycle December 14. And then I was pregnant with twins. So we say boys, right? The twins. That would have been March 2017. And I wasn't trying that whole time, just so people know, because I do have a Facebook group that's related to, it's called Keto Babies. It's related to fertility and keto or low carb.
You did things like get degrees and move.
There's a lot that's happened in the years. Yeah. There's lots that's happened. But one of the top questions we get is, how long after starting keto did you become pregnant? Now, I was trying to improve my health, so I wasn't necessarily trying right away. But within 4 months, I started cycling. So theoretically, I could have become pregnant earlier. But then we kind of started trying. And I remember it was shortly after low carb Breckenridge in 2017.
Yeah.
And what's funny is I have that PowerPoint up. I had a fasting insulin test done in February 2017, just before. And at that time, my insulin, remember it started at 70. It came back in February 2017 of a 7.6.
Wow.
So I was very close. I hadn't gotten to that ideal of 5.
But you were in so much better.
Where I was starting and what has happened over this time. And I remember, hopefully your listeners know of Dr. Fung, right? And he was at Low Carb Breckenridge and you and I were there. And I remember asking him and saying, look, I'm really happy with the progress, but I want to get down to ideal. I want to get to 5 or below. What do I do? And I said, I've been doing some intermittent fasting. At this point, I had been, I was very well fat adapted. And he said, fast more for longer. And I thought, I don't like this answer. Like that's
give me an answer I like better.
Yeah. Like I don't like what you're saying. I want something more specific. You can't just tell me fast more. Which is kind of his shtick, right? Like that's his thing. So I should have known that. And I thought, all right, I'm going to try an extended fast for the first time. And I had never done, pretty much everything I had done was just either intermittent or sometimes 24 hours. And I was not forcing this. And this is part of my story is that over the years, I developed this is 3 years. And I, at one point, I remember first forgetting a meal. And it was the end of the day. And I'm like, did I just forget to eat? Like, is that really me? This person who had to eat every couple hours or I would just starve to death, right? I just forgot to eat a meal and I wasn't even hungry and I feel perfectly fine. So I very gently eased into kind of having some intermittent fasting, right? And so I took Dr. Fung's advice begrudgingly and just said, fine, I'm going to show him that this doesn't work, right? He doesn't know who I am. And I'm like, I'm just going to prove this doesn't work. And so we get back from the conference and I decide to do a 5-day fast or attempt one. I didn't know if I was going to, I was like, okay, this might be a lofty goal.
Carolina is ambitious. She goes straight from intermittent fasting and 5 days.
Yeah. But I was going to prove that it doesn't work, you see.
Right. So you had to go big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So go big, go home. Apparently go big, become pregnant, is what happened. So I really wasn't thinking about it. Ended up fasting kind of over my ovulation cycle. And I do think there may be a connection there. I've since spoken with Megan Ramos about where does human growth hormone peak? It's around that 36-hour mark or 3-day mark, if somewhere in that window. So I do think that might have played a role in me having twins, or it was just my destiny. Who knows? But that over that fasting window, I did become pregnant with twins, which was a surprise. that there were two, even though we, in general, we're hoping to have children. And they were born in late 2017. And so it made me a mom. I remember, you were there, we were in the groups, we were talking about it. It was kind of, it was quite the shock. So to go from having no children to having two babies. And so that's what happened. And I did, after I had already been accepted when I found out I was pregnant, to go to graduate school for a master's in nutrition. I had spent a couple of years doing all the prerequisites, getting my science back up to par. And so I had been accepted. So I ended up deferring. Then I went to graduate school from 2018 to 2000.
So you have 1-year-old twins and you're in graduate school.
Yes. Yeah. I think there were 9 months when I officially started. Yeah. Yeah. So we did that, and that was quite tough. Definitely. And my graduation was going to be June 2020, which it was, but none of us were expecting 2020 to be the year that it was from March to June of that time. And I wrote a thesis, rather than doing the registered dietitian track, which I still could go back and get the registered dietitian certification. But I wanted to write a research thesis. And so my research thesis was about what I called carbohydrate-controlled diets. So kind of that spectrum of, could it be keto? Is it moderate low carb? Is it just low carb? Even Weston A. Price or paleo, that's carbohydrate controlled in a way, right? Quality should be some of the quantity in there of what you're having, not just kind of the free-for-all standard American eat what you eat, right? Which is what happens. Even though we have guidelines, usually we're eating far more carbohydrate, even in the guidelines, which are far too high, in my opinion. So I wrote about carbohydrate-controlled diets and fertility, specifically PCOS, exactly what I had just lived through. And so that was my research thesis. And I found it very interesting. And at some point in there, I started that Keto Babies Facebook group, trying to have a focus on basically sharing my story and showing that it's possible. And that, in my opinion, PCOS is reversible, which we may or may not hear. But I see every single day these stories and women in disbelief. They're like, is this really happening? Am I pregnant on my own? Did I just start cycling? Did I just, all these different milestones of things we didn't think were possible.
So, and we didn't say this part, she's pregnant again with her third baby.
Yes. So just one this time, but I am pregnant again, and I'm due here in 3 weeks.
We had to get this podcast in.
Yeah. Kind of unbelievable this time to me. It went so much faster. Anyone who's had multiple pregnancies, it seems like the second just kind of flies by. And so I am working in clinic as a certified nutritionist. I'm the clinical nutritionist at the medical clinic where I work. And I am pregnant, due in 3 weeks. And I'll be off on leave for a little while. And, this time around, it was quite different to become pregnant, right? I'm already healthy. I'm already cycling. This whole time, I just continued. I stayed keto / low carb through the twin pregnancy. I've stayed keto, low carb through this pregnancy, and there's kind of a broad range. And so even though there was some nausea or some aversions, I made it work. I stuck with whole food. And a phrase that I use, and I'll pass this along for anyone who's like, I just don't know the right way, right? Even though what we're saying is there isn't necessarily a one right way, but a phrase that I use all the time is protein and produce. And I just kind of stick with that, right? It's going to change per person. The kind of protein, the amount of protein, the amount of fat that's on your protein, the type of produce that you're having. Is it strictly non-starchy veg? Are you having very limited? Are you more carnivore style? Are you having more moderate and having more berries? I saw you posted a thing on cottage cheese and berries today, right? It varies day to day. But if you stick with protein and produce, for the most part, you're going to be on a whole food diet, right? Now, depending on, I work with patients who are not anywhere on the low carb spectrum at all, depending on what they're working on with their physician. They might be adding in starches. They might be adding in different things. But the foundation is there of a nutrient dense diet that is founded on whole food, that is protein and produce. It's very difficult to have a highly processed meal that's just those two ingredients or something.
Yes, it is.
Right? Like you're just not going to have it. It's not until the processed carbohydrate comes into play that you're having some sort of processed meal. And that's usually involves a bun or a wrap or something else, or, a giant plate of pasta with a little bit of protein on it. Those are your starch-based meals. And that's kind of been my focus is even on the keto side. I stick with protein and produce, and I'm able to keto that way. And you can be firmly in low carb territory and also do protein and produce. So that's how I just keep it really simple and not overwhelming. And most of the time I don't use a lot of recipes. I do. There's some great ones out there where I'm like, I want a certain flavor, but if you want simple, you don't always need a recipe, right? Pick your protein, pick your non-starchy veg, you're done.
Yeah. Easy peasy. And, once you learn to cook meat, really get a thermometer, get a instant read thermometer. Your life will be changed. But, if you learn to cook protein, you're pretty much done. You're like, I can cook meat. Or rather, I say protein as if I hate it when people do that. And then I do it. Learn to cook your meat. And then from there, you'll be in good shape.
Right.
Because in restaurants, they call it a protein.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, and I say that too, because I might be working with a patient who is plant-based, which is not my personal recommendation for most people. If you are comfortable eating animal products, I do think that's the best way to go. I think we're, going to be a lot healthier in the long run with that. But in my, professional experience, it might be a plant-based protein.
Right.
So I have to know that. I'm not a big fan of having smoothies or things like that, but for some people that's what's happening, or maybe there's a situation. So I use the word protein, but hopefully we're looking at meat. And I know you're a fan of Gordon Ramsay too. You probably showed me, I probably saw the first video from him because of you.
I think I did post that scrambled egg video.
Yes. And that started me down this path. He now has a whole bunch of tutorial videos on how to cook different meats. So he's like how to cook the perfect steak, how to cook chicken, how to whatnot. And he's nice.
That's the part. He's apparently, if you don't work for him, you're fine.
Yeah. So he's very nice, obviously knowledgeable, obviously professional. And I found them to be quite useful and kind of fun just to watch. So not all of his full meals are low carb, but really it's like you're just looking how to cook a steak. What you put next to it is your choice, right? So so I highly recommend that. If you want to search Gordon Ramsay tutorial videos, that's another great
YouTube
tool.
is fabulous. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I just want to circle back to, that's how I mentioned your second pregnancy.
Oh, yeah.
Is how much weight did you end up losing from your highest weight to your lowest?
Yes. So I usually say roughly 200 pounds, right? Which is a whole person.
Yeah.
Right. My lowest weight that I have recorded was about 191 or so.
And you're tall. You're 6 feet.
I'm 6 feet tall.
Yeah.
Yes. And I also was getting Dexa scans. So that's another thing I recommend. If you have access to a Dexa scan, go get one. The one that I use, it's a mobile truck and you can go there and schedule online. I know they're in Washington, California, and I think Texas. So
you can just Google Dexa scan and
that's your city.
State. Yeah.
Yeah, and you'll find there's a lot of them popping up. They're extremely useful. And what it does is it's a form of an X-ray, but it gives you the exact weight, but really they're determining density for your bone, your muscle, and your body fat. And what's particularly useful is it will tell you the distribution of your body fat. Is it visceral fat around your organs, or is it subcutaneous, just kind of making you fluffy? Visceral is much more associated with issues with health, right? So this is the stuff around your organs. We're thinking like fatty liver, things like that. It also will tell you the distribution of your muscle. And this is important because your average person eating a standard American diet who wants to cut and lose weight, let's say, and a lot of times these DEXA scans were being done on athletes. So we have a lot of interesting information of even, very thin, fit people who then go to cut. Usually what they do is just cut calories across the board, including protein. That's what most people tend to do.
Right.
And on average, I think it's around what will happen. Let's say someone loses 10 pounds, they'll lose 7 pounds of fat, 3 pounds of muscle. Somewhere around there is the average if you just cut calories across the board. I did this. Now, again, I'm 6 feet tall, and I had about 135 pounds of lean mass, and I was losing weight without losing lean mass. And I remember the text saying, like, how are you doing this? Now, I was very overweight with lots of fat to lose at the beginning, but I have these progression photos somewhere on my Instagram, saved somewhere, and I was maintaining my muscle mass, probably because I was just eating adequate protein. And I was following kind of a higher fat version, but I was still getting adequate protein, it seems. I must have been. I wasn't eating like a super high protein keto, but I think my protein definitely was higher than what it was when I was eating all the carbs, right? Because they basically displace protein. And that's what happens when you're just eating protein, veg and fat, and you're eating low carb, you automatically pretty much will have more protein. And so I didn't know a lot about it at the time, but I was able to maintain my muscle mass. And I had another Dexa scan last year, just a month before I was pregnant. I still have about the same. Now, I have not embarked, I will say. I would love to go and maybe increase my muscle mass. I have done nothing to do that over these years.
So you weren't like lifting heavy weights through this period?
No, I have not been doing anything, but I've maintained. My muscle mass was right around the same, 135-ish. It's always been right around there. It fluctuates a couple of pounds here and there.
But I will say you're an active human.
Yes,
you go hiking and you move your body.
This has been amazing. So I didn't know that I loved hiking because I had never been hiking. And once I started to lose weight, and I personally felt more confident. Now, if you want to go out and do things, you can do that at any weight. I absolutely support that. But for those who have been in much larger bodies or have been very overweight and you have felt uncomfortable and you don't want to go to the gym or the wherever because you're worried you won't fit in, I think we can at least understand that feeling that I had. And that feeling kept me from doing things that I didn't know I loved even. So I wish I had gone out, and I should have gone out, but I have now. And now I know I love hiking. And I'm like, you'll find me in the forest. I just love it. I'm in the Seattle area, the Northwest. We have beautiful hiking trails. And I absolutely love hiking. So I do that now, not even long hikes, but just I go out often. And so even with that activity, I wasn't going to the gym every day. I wasn't doing those kinds of things. So, but I still lost body fat. I maintained muscle mass. And I've been able to, as I would say, reverse PCOS, be in the best health of my life, have amazing energy, right? Go to graduate school while not sleeping with very young twins, like do all of these things that I know would not have been possible if I was still up there in that 400 or so pound range. I was exhausted. Right? If you're listening and you're like, oh, it's not so bad, but you're the kind of person that, you work and you come home and you sit on the couch because you need to rest. It's like, well, you might have been sitting during work all day. I did. My work was sitting all day. So really, why was I so tired? What was going on? So
I think there is a point at which when we're so unhealthy that just being alive is exhausting.
Yeah. Right. And I wasn't sleeping well, I don't think. I remember waking up and feeling tired.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I probably wasn't. And all these things that now, like we have these podcasts and we have these physicians and we have PhDs we can listen to and conferences and all these things that I didn't know about then. And now I listen and I'm like, man, I wish 10 years ago I had heard all of that. It would have made it a lot easier. Right.
Yeah.
Hopefully I would have been in the right headspace to listen. And sometimes we just need to hear the same thing over and over until it finally clicks. But it did for me. Thank goodness. I have no desire to add back, some of these very heavily processed, starchy foods that have no benefit. And I'm not someone who's really strict on, again, like, oh, I can't have a strawberry because it'll put me at 21 grams of carbohydrate. And I am now at the point where I can eat intuitively. And we spoke about that kind of intuitive eating, healthy at any size, like that mindset. I strongly believe that you need to be in a place of health in order to have that intuition. And part of that, honestly, is hormonal, right? Like what's ghrelin and leptin doing and all of these sorts of things. And now I can say like, oh yeah, I am hungry. It's been 6 hours. what would I like to have? And I look in the fridge and it's filled with, salmon, steak, pork loin, like all these different things, pulled pork, like all these different great meats that I can make. And I'm like, my intuition tells me I want salmon. And then I can say, okay, what do I want with this salmon? My intuition tells me it wants roasted Brussels sprouts with pancetta. Okay. And so now I can listen to that, and that's not an issue, right? Because I'm still eating within what I define as food. And this I think is important. Everything at the grocery store isn't food. Just because it's there, just because a flavor scientist has made it and put it in a shiny, crinkly bag, doesn't mean that it's what I define as food. And again, this is going to change for different people, what they do. But for me, it's pretty much whole food, and there's not a lot outside of that, of the meat and produce section that I define as food. For the most part, it's kind of these concoctions. And I think we know that, and that's becoming clear. But there is a reality of convenience that pops up. And so obviously you have your recipe books that are out. You have your support groups that are there. I have been less of a recipe user, mostly because I found it difficult. This was the thing. I actually found, once I learned how to cook, because I had some pretty non-tasty food in the beginning, to be honest. But I was like, I'm not going to throw this out. And I'm like, I'm just going to suffer through and eat it, right? Either it's bland or it's mushy or it's weird. And I've since learned how to cook. But to me, that's the easy thing, right? If I'm coming home from a day of classes, let's say when I'm in grad school, I don't want to try to find, and you have a quick 5 ingredient cookbook, I think, right? But some of the other things that were there were, take out these 30 ingredients and 20 of them are spices.
Oh yeah. And even I grew up cooking, I was a foodie from the way back. Mm-hmm. So I've always cooked. And so for me, recipes and cooking are kind of a hobby. They're a joy. But if Candid Camera lived in my house, thankfully they do not, they would see that 99% of the nights is a simple meal. And I'm very happy when I have leftovers.
Yep. And you and I both know, and I've seen you do that, Instagram versus reality, right? And I do. And I like to make pretty food too. And for me, that's usually lunch, because that's when I have
your Instagram
time.
Has gotten very attractive.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. That's because, I don't post those other days, right? But yesterday I have my medley. So find what works for you. My vegetable medley that I always make that I really love. And it's just because I like the flavors. For me, it's purple cabbage, red bell pepper, and mushrooms. And probably zucchini.
For a little stir fry thingy?
Yeah, basically. And that's the medley that I like. And sometimes I'll eat them solo. But that's what I tend to go for a lot. And technically, you guys, red bell pepper and zucchini are both fruit. So if someone's like, oh, you're not eating fruit, it's not healthy. I'm like, I eat a lot of fruit. It's just savory fruit.
And
I eat a lot of jalapeno,
Red bell pepper is very high in vitamin C.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if that's coming up, not that I feel you have to eat fruit, but there are the savory fruits. And so that's kind of I'd say those are probably my top 4. I know everyone's all about cauliflower, and I like cauliflower, but I've actually found that this purple cabbage, mushrooms, red bell pepper, and zucchini, those are the 4 that I love. Mm-hmm. So I keep those stocked, and I keep them chopped in a bag, and I literally just dump it from the bag. So it's kind of like using convenience food, but I literally just dump it into the skillet with butter, salt, and garlic. And that is my go-to. So if I am someone, it's been a day, or I'm not going to cook something else, I always have that to fall back on.
So dinner will be ready in 10, 15 minutes.
Yes. So what I do is I toss them in the skillet, and then I pretty much walk away and I do the protein, the meat, what it's going to be. And I would say 9 times out of 10 that is cooking in the air fryer, the meat. So it's usually what happens. And so this is such a fast process. I'm not spending a lot of time, and that's my go-to. And the other day I even used a pre-cooked corned beef hash that didn't have, not hash, corned beef. So corned beef that didn't have anything else in it, and it had been pre-cooked. It was left over in the fridge. I just heated up. I took the whole thing, the chunk of meat and the pre-cooked veggies, and I just put them in the skillet. And then I ate them once they were warm. It's that easy. So,
and you are someone you are pregnant. You are very pregnant at this point.
Yes.
You have 2-year-old twins. You work.
They're 3 now.
Oh gosh, sorry. 3-year-old twins.
Toddlers.
Now you are into everything. You have a husband. You have a house to take care of, and you're coming home and making dinner. It's no big deal.
Yeah, from one of the jobs. I have the 2 jobs. Yeah.
Yeah. Crazy.
So, and it's not, now, at the beginning, that was overwhelming. At the beginning, I didn't have children, right? And I had stopped working. We glanced over that. I had gone on disability leave. I had stopped working. Like, I had all the time in the world to cook. And it was taking me an hour, and I was very overwhelmed, and it didn't taste good. So that's kind of where it started. It was very non-rewarding, other than I started to feel fantastic. So I kept going.
It was worth it.
Yeah. But, you learn and you find what you like and what you look for. I do recommend, I've heard so many people say this. I think cooking with Christy. Is that right?
Yeah. Christy's great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So she'll say the same thing. You find like your 5 or your 10 go-to meals, and you just have it, and it becomes second nature. And yes, you'll probably make some fancy things here and there, but there's the reality of life that making it simple is what's going to make it sustainable. And if it's too hard and you feel like it's too much work, that's where we usually start to falter, and we're like, okay, what drive-through can I go to? Right. But when it's really simple and it's faster to make it at home than it is to go anywhere, why wouldn't I eat this nutrient-dense, delicious food?
Right. Yeah, that's Christy Sullivan. She's cooking. I think Cooking with Christy is her stuff. And then she's one of the recipe creators and teachers at Diet Doctor.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so I've heard her say that about, have your go-to recipes, and everyone likes something different. So this is where it's like, you have great programs. Find the program that works for you. Find the foods that you like. You're going to have to experiment and test, and then keep it simple for yourself, unless you like making it complicated and that brings you joy. And you are one of the few people who doesn't say, I have no time to cook, because I hear that all the time. I'm really busy, right? Everyone says I'm super busy. Yeah. And so if you have time and you want to spend time, then get some of the fancy ones. If you're like most of the people I talk to, find what works, keep it simple.
And keep it stocked in your freezer.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And I think that's part of the reason I like those certain veggies is they last pretty well. And you can get lettuces. And by all means, I have trouble with lettuces that they wilt really quickly. Mine don't hold up. And so I just found, I'm like, purple cabbage, I really like that flavor. So that's one of my go-tos.
Nice. Yeah. So I think that's great advice. Like, find what works for you and just put them in the rotation, and save complicated for the days you have time. And if you don't have any of those days, don't do them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. So you mentioned earlier that you can be found at Keto Babies on Facebook. You have a Facebook group. You have an Instagram that's at Keto Babies. Mm-hmm. If people want to get in touch with you, if people want to learn more, like you focus on keto and eating in general, low carb eating in general, but you also talk a lot about fertility.
Yes.
What if people want to learn more?
Yeah, I had stopped. I used to, before I was working as a clinician in a medical clinic, I was doing a lot of coaching on the side. And I have since stopped doing that, just time-wise, it wasn't working. But I realized a while ago, and how I said, pull the trigger, like just do what you want to do, like stop being afraid. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just do it. I've had this idea for a fertility boot camp for a while, and I have mapped that out. And so I'm planning now that I will be in maternity leave. I don't know if it'll happen then, but we should get some progress on what I'm calling a fertility boot camp.
Nice.
And the website is I'm pretty sure, hopefully.
We'll put it in the show notes, people.
Yeah, but it's myfertilitybootcamp.com. Pretty sure that's the website. So I will have a sign up for that, and hopefully going live. And so this is going to talk about not only the menstrual cycle and fertility and, the female body and everything that goes along with that, common issues with fertility. So whether it's infertility or what we often call subfertility, right? Like maybe you are cycling, but you want to become pregnant and you're not, or you just want to make sure your fertility is optimal for when that's going to happen, which I highly recommend looking at your fertility before you're ready to become pregnant. So discussing that, and then discussing kind of a range of diets and why those work. I'm not against anything that's not keto. I just find that when someone is struggling with fertility, and this is again largely based upon my research thesis and what I have found in the body of literature, especially when it's female-based subfertility, we know that the underlying pathophysiology, the underlying issue, is usually insulin resistance. And so the best way from a nutritional perspective to combat that is going to be something on the carbohydrate-controlled spectrum, low carb, keto. So there'll be a lot of information on how to do that, how to address hormones, where does fat, protein, carbohydrate play a role in all of that, and the range. Because some people will say, look, I'm okay making slower progress. And some people say, no, I want your 4-month story.
What's the turbo version?
Yes, like I'm willing to do absolutely anything. And some people are like, I have time. I'm not actively trying to conceive. It just depends on your life and what's happening. So Fertility Bootcamp, myfertilitybootcamp.com, I believe is the link for that. So you'll have that. And I am putting it out there on myself that this needs to finally happen. I have been working on these questions and videos and tutorials and PowerPoints for a long time. So it's time to just put it out there. And, my goal is really to help, because I struggled for a long time. And not that I was, looking to conceive in my teenage years or early 20s, but then when the time came, I then had to start working on my fertility. So then there was a multi-year, process of learning about my fertility, learning how to cook, learning how to keto. It's exactly what I'm hoping to prevent others from having to go through, right? If you're thinking about it, or if you have PCOS now, maybe you're not ready to have children. Maybe you don't even want to have children and you just want to make sure that you are in optimal health. Then how can we do that? Fertility is a sign of health, or cycling is a sign of health. And so, looking at it from that perspective, there'll probably be some, male factor hormones thrown in there as well, because it's definitely a piece of it. But I'd say PCOS is the most common, issue that we see, at least in the keto baby space.
It's one of the most common issues in society.
Yeah. It is the most common form of infertility. And it is female factor. But then there are other factors. Sometimes there's unexplained infertility. And a lot of times, those may be related to insulin resistance as well, or the quality of food. So there's a lot of things. So all of this will be in there. You'll have nice little tutorials that you can go through, bookmarks and areas to learn, to keep it simple, hopefully, which is important, which is why I need to be able to record and edit, because I can definitely, as you can tell, ramble and go on and make it complicated when it doesn't need to be, because honestly, in the end, we're looking for a solution. And so we'll put as much information from the research in there, but break it down in a way that's easy to digest, so to speak. And then
I just think you're real smart. So you're so smart that you can't not share what you know. And I get it. But yes, I think anyone who knows Carolina actually knows she doesn't give herself enough credit for how good her course is going to be, because she knows what she's doing.
Thank you.
She has 3 babies to prove it.
Yes, that's true. When I thought, again, 90s, it was like, well, you just won't have kids, right? That was kind of the, or come back to us if you want to.
13-year-old thing.
And they might have phrased it a different way, but what I took away from that is I'm not having children. Yeah. And I have a friend who always tells me, she says, explain it like I'm 5. That's that phrase. Have you ever seen that? So I'll say something and explain something that we're talking about, keto or hormone or something related. And she says, explain it like I'm 5. And so it's always a good reminder, break it down so that we're not having to think too hard. And then you can provide the sources and go into more detail, but hey, what's the takeaway point here? And that's what this course is going to provide.
Nice. Excellent. Well, we'll definitely give the links to that in the show notes. So whatever podcast platform people are listening on, you can find those notes along with that if you scroll down. So it's been awesome to have you on this show, and I wish you the best of luck. And baby number 3 coming any time now. And
maybe before this is public. Or maybe,
probably not. It's going to come out pretty soon, but maybe.
Oh, okay.
Maybe. And hopefully the boys are kind to their smaller sibling at this point. But they're already used to sharing, so that's a win.
Hopefully. You say that like we can have 10 of the exact same car, and they have to have the one car. They both want that one. But it'll be an interesting journey, and I'm pretty excited. So.
Yeah, exciting. Okay, well, everyone, please check out Carolina's Facebook group, Facebook page, Instagram page. Even if you don't want babies anytime soon, you might know somebody that wants babies. And she just posts some good food too on her Instagram. So just so you know. All right. It was awesome to have you. Thanks, Carolina.
It's great to see you again.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Keto Life Support. Want more information? Want show notes? Want to suggest a topic? Just head over to ketolifesupport.com. That's where all that kind of thing can go on. By the way, I have a request. If you could go to your podcast host and hit subscribe, we would really, really appreciate it. And what would be even more awesome is if you could write a review. And what would be even more awesome than that is if you could write like a really flattering review. Just asking, you do you. All right. So thanks